My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
Dr. Ferdinand Santos, thank you for joining me in the trenches again.
My pleasure, Jerm. Thank you for having me. It's always fun.
It is fun. Just as much fun as watching Artemis.
Oh, yes. It's a bad film production, isn't it? I was expecting something more worthy of the sequel to the 1969 hit smash, Neil of the Strong Arms and his friend, the drunk Buzz Aldrin, walking around on the moon. I thought they might come up with something a little bit more interesting, but what can you say? I guess the 1.5 trillion US dollars spent since the 1970s has obviously not got into production grade AI and CGI software.
It was such a letdown, and it took months to get going. They started promising in January, and then they kept having delays. What do you think was going on?
Hard to say. I think there's some complexity in the calibration and coordination of what they're trying to convey. So, as we discussed in terms of physics and technology, we discussed the 1960s before, the Gagarin fraud and the Capricorn 1 flights of Shepard and Gus Grissom right after Gagarin. And then after the Shepard flight in May of 1961 is when Kennedy made his famous announcement that by the end of the decade, Americans would be on the moon. And a few years after that, playing golf. So, surprisingly enough, just before the end of the deadline, the Americans made the landing. So, but if you look at the physics and technology, and you look at any part of the program of Apollo or Artemis, it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. So, why the delay? I think there's some cosmic solar events that were happening. Certainly in January, solar events and cosmic events were quite active. And probably there's some calibration and complexity in terms of coordinating what they're trying to present to people in terms of a flight, a journey, the communications, the imagery, and the all-important return and splashdown. So it's not difficult because that's what Hollywood does for a living. They create artificial virtual realities, don't they? So, and NASA has been deeply embedded with Hollywood since the time of Walt Disney in the 1950s. Disney was very active in NASA. And this is a point that the fanboys just prefer to ignore. So starting with Disney, then with Kubrick and many other directors and Hollywood personalities, there's always been a relationship. There's almost like a symbiosis between Hollywood and NASA. And it's inexplicable, really. So why are you engaging with Hollywood? Why is Kubrick and other people from Hollywood present at NASA meetings? Why is Disney meeting almost every month for a period of time with NASA executives? What are they doing? And I think because of people like you and me, well, you understand the domain. I don't understand anything about making film or photos or anything like that. But I understand there's probably some complexity involved. And if you understand the craft and domain, you can create a Stanley Kubrick 2001 Space Odyssey where space looks quite real, doesn't it, in that movie? And that came out just before the Apollo program launched in '69. So Kubrick is kind of the baseline, I think, for the imagery. And if you look at what they're presenting through Apollo and through Artemis, I still see a lot of Kubrick in that. I see a lot of reuse of ideas, and with deepfake AI and software simulation and advanced CGI, it's quite difficult to know what we're looking at, you and I. When we see something, when we consume it, we don't really know if it's real or not. We can't tell. And that was true in 1969. Now, 1969, the Apollo program, as we discussed, was a fraud. That landing in July of '69 never happened. And there's 1,001 reasons why it never happened. And as a baseline, if you look at the problems that they had with the Apollo program, you look at the size of the rocket; it was far too small on the launch pad. You look at fuel, you look at batteries, you look at communications, you look at the quite primitive analog technology running on vacuum tube hardware. You look at aspects of even understanding space, the radiation, and what I call the ether or ether, as the Americans are sometimes English say ether. Americans as well. Ether or ether is a plenum of space. It's an actual vibrant material medium, and it's not empty. And they know this. It's in NASA's own calculations when they calculate fuel. So when you look at space as a domain, you don't know anything about it in 1969, really, in terms of humans traversing over a period of 10 days around the moon and back. So if you add up all the probability theories, you do probability analysis, you do Bayesian analysis, and you add up all the components, and there's many ways of doing it. The chance of success is so small that you would not launch into production. So a normal company, before they go live in production, you've done testing, and you are 99.69 sure of success and go into production and deploy and feel reasonably certain that it will succeed. That's what most companies do. If you do the same analysis with NASA, it doesn't work out. Go ahead, sorry.
No. A lot of people to this day still don't know that the Apollo mission, let's just, for the sake of argument, say that it was real. Okay. What a lot of people don't know is that they actually filmed the entire thing in the event that the real thing wouldn't occur. And this is now even being acknowledged in Hollywood. So even
absolutely.
So even if you believe the Apollo missions were real, you wouldn't know, because the astronauts themselves said, well, the engineers themselves said you can't tell the difference between what they filmed and what was real.
100% correct. It was filmed. There's many simulations involved with the Apollo program. This is what people don't know. They don't teach you this in education or in the fake news or anywhere. You have to go digging for it yourself, and you'll find out that starting in 1965, NASA, which is a CIA company, it should be emphasized that NASA is part of the CIA and Pentagon complex of the U.S. empire, as I call it. And if you want to know about the deep state, then you're looking right at the CIA and the Pentagon. I mean, that's the deep state that runs the U.S. and basically runs the so-called New World Order that they keep talking about. And I'm not American, so I look at the American empire a little bit differently than an American would. So NASA is a CIA company. It always has been. If you look at NASA's leadership, it's always come from the military. So it gets its directives, its leadership. In the 1960s, it's fighter pilots from the U.S. military. And in 1965, the CIA and NASA built an incredibly complicated engineering complex just down the road from Langley, Virginia, which happens to house the CIA headquarters, a place called Hallam, but it's basically Langley. And I still think it's the world's largest, I call it hardware simulator, but it's a hard physical set of simulators that would imitate and replicate the entire moon landing. They had replicas of the moon. They had replicas of the moon's surface. They were hand-painted. They had the ever-present black curtains in the background. And they said it was a training and simulation center. And they have pictures and some grainy films of Armstrong and other people there doing some training. And on my Substack, I describe the 5 main simulators and how it is entirely possible, end-to-end, to simulate the entire Apollo 11 mission from Langley, and then marry that to a photo shoot or film shoot at Cannon Air Force Base. So why an Air Force base in the desert? Many reasons for that. Secrecy is one, but the materials at hand, sand, desert sand. It looks like the lunar surface. So it's very easy to create a lunar surface in an Air Force hangar, secure it, lock it down for a period of 1 or 2 months, do the film shoot. It wouldn't take that long, do the editing, and then marry that to the simulation. That's a far more credible explanation of what happened with Apollo 11 than their claim that using that technology, with the lack of fuel, with the lack of battery power, with the analog communications, with navigation systems that have never been tested in space, through the radiation-rich environment, through the Van Allen radiation belts, which he completely ignored. This is the other thing with Apollo. So according to NASA, after the Apollo 11 flight, some years later, they said, well, we zipped through the Van Allen radiation belts, which are anywhere from 35,000 to 50,000 miles thick and deep. You can't avoid them. We did that in 10 minutes. So this is a speed never before understood in human history. So it's a remarkable speed. And so, of course, they didn't do it because they didn't have the fuel, didn't have the thrust. And then their story after that is, well, we slowed down. So why would you slow down? Why would you slow down in radiation, which you want to go as fast as possible and get there as quickly as possible, and then on your way back as fast as possible because of radiation? So that's not the way they think. So they took their time over 10 days. They talk about braking and deceleration, then reacceleration. They talk about doing the slingshot. All of this is nonsense with Apollo 11 because the Apollo 11 craft could not have traversed the radiation belts in that period of time. Simply impossible. And the Orion program, Orion 2, the minivan, as I call it, the 10-ton minivan for Artemis 2, apparently, for whatever reason, they have lots of reasons why they did this, was at 46,000 miles altitude, right on the top of the Van Allen radiation belts in a plasma furnace. And he spent 42 hours there, orbiting the Earth and doing a slingshot around the Earth to the moon. So Apollo's going through in 10 minutes. Orion 2 is taking 42 hours. The story doesn't make any sense.
Well,
if you look at
let's be fair here. They're using new technology, Ferdy.
Well, that's the thing. I'm a Substack. I compare the technology. It's actually not that different. So back to the U.S. 1.5 trillion spend since the 1970s. Where's it going into? I compared the craft. I compare everything: the rockets, the craft, the fuel. The only thing that's really different, and the thickness of the hull. So the hulls are the same thickness, but 1.5 inches. The hull of Orion. The minivan is a little bit different. There's some titanium alloys, but it's still too thin. You still need feet of lead or 2 or 3 to protect yourself from radiation. And they confirmed this with their supposed Artemis 1 unmanned journey in 2022, where they were, I was reading the documentation, they sounded shocked. Oh, there's protons and radiated particles can go through anything. They're saying in their report, they can go through metal, it can go through water, it can go through hydrogen. That's interesting. So it's a radiation-filled environment. And so the 1.5 inch doesn't really help you. And the AVCode coating that they put on, which is for reentry, is a resin-based material, which is another problem for them. It doesn't protect you against radiation. It's just it's a polymer, it's a resin and silica fiber mixture and epoxy. And so it's not going to help you with the radiation. The particles are going to transfer themselves through that. It's like having a screen door and expecting to keep out the mosquitoes or small insects. It's just not working. So NASA's own documentation, they did a review in 2024 and early 25, and it gave a very high probability of failure for Artemis 2, but of course it's 100% successful, as we all knew it would be. And they talk about radiation. So they gave some really top advice, the astronauts. He said, hide behind the water and the food, stack them up in the minivan. And when you go through the Van Allen radiation belts, hide behind there for a while. And that should do it. Because their theory is that water will deflect away radiated particles, which is nonsense. But they have never solved, from the time of Apollo, the problem with radiation. They haven't solved it yet. And because there's trade-offs in what they're trying to do, as we talked about before, there's always a trade-off in physical science or in astrophysics with weight, with power, with fuel, with batteries, with absolute size, with communications, with radiation protection, with reentry protection. It's quite a balancing act. A lot of variables to consider. They're all interdependent. And so if you overcompensate, for example, on I'll have 2 feet of lead for radiation protection. Well, you can't launch it. It's just too heavy. And this is one of the problems you have with the AVCode, this epoxy blend. They put on about a ton and a half of epoxy resin, mostly on the fat bottom, let's call it, the protected zone at the bottom. And on the back of the hull, they have these little silica tiles. That's not going to protect you from anything. So when someone asked me, well, why didn't you just coat the whole thing 5 times and this magic AVCode, Merlin approved, Wizard approved? Because of the weight. It's a 10-ton minivan. If I start coating it in AVCode, the 10 tons go up to 12, 13. I can't even launch it. So again, it's that balancing act. So they're really, the constraints are quite serious. So if you go through any part of the Apollo program, and Apollo had the same problem, by the way, with protection. They had the 1.5 inch aluminum can. They have all these fanboys on TV doing their debunking of the moon critics. And they have all sorts of nonsense to do on TV where they prove that the aluminum is good enough to protect against. It simply isn't. And NASA has admitted that 2022, 23, when they're quite amazed at how easy the protons, which are solar radiated particles, pass through anything. So that's just part of the problem that they have with the radiation. The other thing that's quite amazing, as you might know, is that there's 20, 25, 30 solar cosmic events almost every day, except when NASA puts its minivan into operation for 10 days, and suddenly it's quiet. Everything's quiet. So this is impossible. There has to be over 7
delays.
All the delays, yeah. And they launch in April Fools, and they planned it perfectly. They've done the solar calendaring exactly right, and they know exactly when it's going to be quiet. But if you take that probability over the 6 Apollo missions, 71 include Apollo 13, which is also just a contrived stunt. I think we mentioned Apollo 13, the supposed failure that they had. If there was a battery failure, you're dead. I mean, you're dead in minutes because you'll just freeze to death. But the Russians, of course, the Soviets, to be more exact, found the capsule floating off the Bay of Biscay and gave it back to the Americans in the fall of 1971. So it was a mislaunch, is what it was. And so, but they had simulations. So, I want to go back to the Langley thing, just quickly. So, Langley had in 1965, it was built in 65. All these simulators, you can simulate everything. And one thing they could simulate, they had about 1,000 programs of simulation, including failures. So they could simulate a failure or a problem or something happening mid-flight, like with Apollo 13, or something happening off the launch, and they could simulate that and record it. So every possibility could have been simulated and married to the film. So if you look at Orion Artemis 2, one thing that's never made sense is a story that they're traveling at, and I'll take re-entry here just to start with that. But they're traveling to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere at Mach 32. So Mach 32 is roughly 24,000 miles per hour. And if you're hitting the atmosphere at that speed, there's no chance you're going to survive as you go through the layers of the atmosphere. But what they do is NASA says in their own documentation that it takes 25 minutes to re-enter. So what they're saying is that at 24,000 miles per hour, which is Mach 32, they're basically starting that countdown from 10,000 miles in altitude, which is fine. And at that altitude, the diffusion of molecules is quite obvious. If you look at the comparison to sea level here, so roughly in the Earth we have, look at molecular compaction, we have about 1.2 kilograms per meter cubed here. At 10,000 miles or so in altitude, that drops to 10 minus 18 kilograms per meter cubed, meaning that it's 0.1701 kilogram per meter cubed. I mean, that's quite diffuse, but that's not how physics works. And so as you go down through the layers and you hit 75 miles, you're suddenly at 10 to the minus 7. So that's 10,000 times denser than the layer just above. And so you're going down through density. And so the problem that they have is re-entry. This is why I think all the 1960s events are frauds, for the simple fact you can't re-enter at that speed with the technology we have. Thermodynamics, kinetic energy, just basic physics won't allow it. And this is something that you can't simulate, however. And so I've shared with people simulators online. They can also buy some if you want a physical version. And you can put in these parameters. You can put in parameters of the mass or density. In this case, the Orion minivan was 10 tons. You can put in the atmospheric density. So you start at 10,000 miles, according to NASA. It takes 25 minutes from there. And it's 10 to the minus 18 kg per meter cubed, et cetera, et cetera. You put in the parameters, you'll find out that at around 75 miles in altitude, the structure's gone. It's disintegrated, because it's not just that it's diffused, there's not that many molecules there. Is that when you have a 10-ton minivan moving in through the atmosphere, you're pushing on the molecules. It's hydrostatic pressure, it's called. And it builds up, and the static electricity builds up. And as you go further and further, the pressure keeps building up. And then by the time you hit mile 75 in altitude, you're dealing with 5,000 Fahrenheit at least in temperatures. And there's a thermal transfer, something called a heat soaking. So the AV coat's not going to help you. The AV coat is a resin-based epoxy. So even if the outside is 5,000, but my tin can melts at 500 Fahrenheit, which it does, the AV coat is still, because it's resin-based, it carbonizes, it still transfers the heat and energy. And if any part of that vehicle, anything, anywhere, starts to melt, or if one of the silica tiles on the back hull, which is housing the transponder, which is communications, and the antennas, if just one falls off or it gets ripped off through the hydrostatic pressure and through just the thermal pull and heat transfer, you're dead, you die. And so what's the probability of that happening? It's quite high, actually. So if you take the 7 flights that they said they had, so Apollo 6, 13 as well, let's say, so say 7 or 8 flights, they've never had a problem with reentry. That is statistically impossible. We look at the thermodynamics involved and the hydrostatic pressure, the sheer physics of trying to come back into our atmosphere at that speed. It's not that the molecules are 10 to the minus 18 kg per meter cubed. That's irrelevant. It's the velocity, it's the energy, it's the thermal transfer of heat. All these things come into play, and it envelops the minivan. What they're trying to sell us is that if you go in fat bottom first, and you have an ablative shield that pushes it away. It's actually not true. It envelops the entire craft. This is basic physics. And so it's going to shake the craft. The structure is going to be shaken. And hitting 75 miles in altitude at that speed is roughly the equivalent of you getting in your car at 60 miles an hour, driving 60 miles an hour, smashing into a wall, and multiply that by 160,000 times. And if NASA is saying it takes 20 minutes to re-enter. So it's not just you smashing into a wall at 60 mph and multiplying that by a factor. It's doing it for 20 minutes. So the wall comes back on you. The atmosphere comes back on you with hammers and starts hammering on your car with 1,000 or 1,000,000 hammers for 20 minutes. So what do you see on the splashdown, Jeremy? You see what? A pristine white object like it just went through a car wash being dropped near San Diego.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
And the flag is still pristine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I saw this with Shepard. I know this was Shepard's capsule that he had the antenna pointing around on the top. The antenna be ripped right off because at 75 miles, so Shepard in 61 supposedly went up 75, 80 miles and came down. He actually exited that dividing line that they say separates, let's say, the heavier atmosphere coming down towards the surface from the lighter atmosphere, let's call it. And he did that. There's no way that the antenna is going to be ponging around on reentry at 5,000 Fahrenheit heat with that type of impact from the speed. Now, he's only traveling supposedly at 15,000 miles an hour. These guys are going at 24,000 miles an hour. So the basic laws of physics, when you look at material structures and the transfer of that energy, it's actually just going to pop that minivan. It's just going to pop it. And you're dead before you even get, I think, much below 75 miles in altitude. And then you keep going down. It's denser and denser and denser and denser. The parachutes come out at about mile 6 from the surface. And before you get to mile 6, you're dead. So what happens kinetically is that, and the other thing that people don't talk about, which really annoys me, and it's the same thing with Apollo 11. Apollo 11 never had enough battery power to go anywhere. They were using zinc and silver batteries. They had about a quarter of what they needed. And I talk about that in my Substack. Go through all the numbers analysis. There's simply no way to argue against it. They had never had enough battery power for the command module or for that homeless shelter science fair project from grade 8 that they call the lunar module, which is an embarrassment. So no battery power. Artemis 2 has the same damn problem. They have a 14 kilowatt H battery capacity, 14 kilowatts per hour capacity. It's like running, Jeremy, a transport, 18-wheeler transport on AA batteries. I mean, the Tesla, these idiots on my street who have Teslas, those things take up 75 kilowatt hours, okay, in energy. That's their capacity. These guys are running on 14. So the comparison is that Tesla is roughly 2 tons. The Orion minivan's 10, 5 times the size, but they're running on 5 times the battery capacity. It's just insane. So you're dark within a couple of days on any journey to the moon. But coming back into the reentry, this is really interesting. So they get rid of, and it's another problem for them, but they had the solar panels. You may have been amazed by the solar panels, which was feeding the AA battery. And so, and on my Substack, I give some examples of doing experiments at home where you can see if the AA battery would actually run anything for more than a few minutes. So the AA battery being charged by the 63-foot solar panels, which are folded up and they launch over the ESM. The ESM is the fuel module. It's a generator fuel capacity. And the ESM is essential for the entire program. Without the ESM, they can't go anywhere. That's where the fuel is. So the solar wings are folded over. They go up, then they unfold magically once they get past a certain point, and that's how they feed the battery. Now, when they go back in re-entry, those panels are gone. 30,000, 40,000 miles or so. ESM, which is your fuel, and the wings of the angels are gone, and you're running on the AA battery. The AA battery powers everything. It powers the life support. It powers navigation. It powers all the computer systems. You need it to re-enter. So they don't have enough battery power to re-enter. And And in terms of physics, if you as you go through this process of heading down towards the 75-mile belly flop zone, where it's like belly flopping into a pool, and you get involved with the hydrostatic pressure and structural dynamics, the battery's long dead by then. It's died. It would not withstand the G-force or the speed or all this kinetic transfer of energy. It just wouldn't survive it. So you're basically taking the risk if you're a real astronaut, you're betting your life on the AA battery being in business below 50 miles in altitude. There's absolutely no guarantee of that. In fact, I would say the probability is almost zero based on just physics. The structure itself is going to be subject to shearing and pulling and tearing and heat transfers. If the heat transfers enough, it fries the electronics. It will destroy the battery. And the battery itself will leak. So NASA talked about this in their own documents. They talk about battery leakage. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, yes. So, all right. So the Artemis mission was staged, but something happened on the day, right? There was a rocket that lifted off. What happened?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't really know. I wasn't there. Actually, I don't watch the launch because okay. So I've seen videos of the launch where there's two emergency cable cars coming down beside the rocket as it's just about to take off, and so it goes back to Capricorn 1. So were these astronauts in the cable cars? Because they're supposed to be emergency cable cars. If something goes wrong at the last minute, you can put them in the cars and get them down, I guess.
Wait, from the module. Did I mishear you? Did you say astronauts or actonauts?
Actronauts. They're pretending to be astronauts. They're actronauts. Well, they're unknown as well.
All right. Sorry, carry on.
Well, that's one of the issues for NASA. So these people are unknown, right? So in the 1960s, they spent a lot of time telling especially the American public, how great. I'm sure they were great guys. I'm sure they're all smart and physically, mentally capable. No doubt in my mind about that. They're all young men, Armstrong or Shepard or Grissom, and the other jet fighter pilots. They're actually jet fighter pilots. They had 5,000 or more hours of experience, flight time with complex equipment at high speeds, at high G-force. These people for the Orion 2 minivan, Artemis 2 Orion minivan, I have no idea who they are. No one knows who they are. They do appear to be actors or mildly trained astronauts, but they're nowhere close to the quality that. But they're nowhere close to what whatever you think of it. So Armstrong's a fraud and a criminal for what he did, but as a fighter pilot, these men were real and they were well trained. They're top guns. So I don't know who these people are, and they've done this before with the Polaris SpaceX mission, where they had amateurs apparently going up to 800 miles in altitude and doing all sorts of stuff. Coming back, I don't know if you saw the return of the Polaris mission. They're doing this, punching their arms out and waving and pointing at the camera. And you just went through a near-death experience. You're in a radiated environment. You haven't slept in a long time. You're probably staggering out of there, if at all, or you're being pulled out of there, and you're not doing the arm pumps. You're asking for a hospital bed. So, and they did this with the Blue Origin fraud from Bezos' company, where the starlets went up and imitated the Shepard flight, almost the exact same altitude, but without no helmets needed, no training. I think they trained for like 2 or 3 weeks or something, a few hours here and there. And it was piloted, of course, by Bezos' wife. So this is where we're at. It's all theater. It's not even something you can take seriously. And this kind of is in the same vein. We don't know who these people are. We don't know what it's supposedly well trained, etc. But there's no proof of this, and they'll disappear. You'll never see these people again, whoever they are. So yeah, I think astronauts is a good way.
Do we have any detailed analyses by expert astronauts like Katy Perry?
Well, she did mention the mannequin arm in the window and landing was really her touch. She thought that was a very clever thing to add, and the inward opening door. So it's a space regulation that all doors have to open, hatch doors have to open out. This comes from the Gus Grissom murder of 1967, January, where Grissom a few weeks before hung a lemon on the Apollo 1 and said, we're not going anywhere. This program's a joke. And he was very vocal about it. He went to the media. He was putting together a manuscript on all the defects and why the Apollo missions are going to fail. So so NASA says it was, of course, a wiring issue. It was just a mistake. But the interior of the Apollo 1 of the capsule was covered with flammable material, and the door opened inward. So the NASA story is that they couldn't open the hatch and push their way in because of the way the door was constructed. So they mandated after that has to swing out and they can, for emergency, whatever. So the fact that Bezos Space Origin door opens inward it violates regulations. It would never pass a safety audit or regulation. It could not be launched, in other words. So you just know it's a film for 10,000 other reasons as well. But yeah, these actors, Katy Perry and other people supposedly trained in just a few hours. This is what they're trying to tell us. They're trying to tell us that everyone and anyone can go to the moon or to Mars or to anywhere, and it's going to be very easy. And the reality is that you're going to die. If you try that, you're just simply going to die. This is why they spent so much time advertising 1860s of training for these astronauts, how difficult it was, and how serious a business it was. So now we've gone into almost a parody, haven't we? It's just a movie business.
Going back to the rocket launch, though, I mean, assuming the rocket did launch, where did it go?
Well, that's the thing. I say I don't really know. The trajectory is kind of odd. So NASA has a very low trajectory. It's not like you or I just using, because there's normal people, say, well, probably if the moon is that way, then I want to launch straight up and probably go straight up but no, they go straight up and then they flatten out the angle of exit. And they have some reasons for this. And a lot of reasons have to do with using the Earth as a slingshot. So you exit and then you slingshot around the Earth and go to the moon. But critics have pointed out that you probably just take the same trajectory and fly the rocket into an ocean somewhere and bury it. And then, the astronauts came down in the emergency cable cars and did the Capricorn 1, ended up at Langley or Norton Air Force Base and did the comms from there, which is what they did during the Apollo 11 program, of course. So those guys were terrestrial. They were not talking from space. The comms wouldn't have, the analog comms at that time would not allow it. So what do you think? What do you think happened to the rocket? What's your opinion?
I've got no idea. Perhaps into orbit and coming, I don't know, who knows. But did you see the video of that woman where she forgot her lines?
Oh yeah, that's kind of funny. So she didn't know what to say.
Yes,
was talking and then stopped in mid sentence.
She obviously had an earpiece.
She had an earpiece and she's going like this. She's looking down and muttering to herself, and it's just embarrassing. Really, the whole thing is staged and scripted. Exactly the same as Polaris. Exactly the same as Blue Origin. So they turned into theater. They've taken Walt Disney on his word and just made theater out of it. Unfortunately,
and another thing that you noted on your Substack is that the crew, the guys, they were clean shaven after they crashed down.
Oh yeah. So can you imagine being 10 days? So the 10 days always needs explanation. So the 10 days makes no sense. In actual fact, I think the 10 days is to coordinate the simulation, the simulations they've done, CGI, AI, but also maybe some hardware simulations with the imagery and the story and everything else. I think that's why it takes 10 days. There's no mechanism, there's no fuel. So one thing I talk about is there's just no fuel to do what they're saying that they're going to do. So they have about 2,000 US gallons of hypergolic fuel for the Orion minivan. It's probably 1/3 of what is really needed. And they say that when they return and hit the Earth's atmosphere, there's almost nothing left. Well, that you die then, because according to their own documentation, you need to have fuel for the reentry. And apparently they had none or very little. So the fuel doesn't add up either. So if you look at the 10 days, it's hard to understand what they're saying with the 10 days. Why would it take 10 days? How would you slow down without retro rockets firing, which takes fuel? And they talk about things like, magic words, gravity, etc.
Yeah, but the point that you were making is just something as obvious as growing a beard. In 10 days, you're going to grow quite a lot of stubble, if not a beard, and they're certainly not shaving up there.
No, it's 10 days, very long time, and you're not sleeping well. You're eating, who knows what they're eating. They're apparently taking selfies with the iPhones,
And
using
and how does the
Outlook.
toilet work? I mean, how do they go to the toilet?
Well, they have a toilet there. Apparently, it has some problems with it. But yeah, you have to get rid of the waste out through the craft into space somehow. But yeah, it'd be a very unhygienic, unfriendly environment. They've never been there before, these people. So you'd be terrified. You'd be terrified. It'd be very cold. It's minus 250 Fahrenheit, roughly. And again, you're relying on this AA battery for heat systems, for navigation, for everything. So you're completely reliant on this never before tried in a manned flight, anyways. Solar energy from wings to a very small battery to run everything in the capsule. And people never talk about this, but that's the obvious issue. If you're an astronaut, a real astronaut, you wouldn't go in it because there's absolutely no backup. If something happens to the solar wings, and it would in a radiation-rich environment, and space is not a vacuum, it's a plenum. It's full of energy and material, neutrinos, planktons, gamma rays, photons, plasma. It is a rich environment. It's not a vacuum. So something would go wrong with the solar panels. The chance of that happening is pretty high. You see it with the ISS. You see them on their supposed spacewalks. What are they doing? They're fixing the solar panels. That's what they're doing because they have to replace them. So over 10 days, you're going to have a problem with the solar panels. You're going to the dark side of the moon, supposedly. There's apparently no solar radiation photonic energy there. So you're dark. So how does the little AA battery work then? So you're hoping that is stored, the energy is stored there, and you have enough to get around the dark side of the moon and come back to the lighter side and receive the energy again. There's so many things that can go wrong in this process. And the first time it's tried, as always, it works perfectly. It's just not real life. So it doesn't happen in production like that. So the only thing they can say is, well, we did it with Artemis 1, which was unmanned and seemed to work okay. But there's lots of problems with the Artemis 1 story as well. So they were caught photoshopping Artemis 1 photos. And then in 2023, they had a team of the scientists had a little chin wag. And they on YouTube, you can see it. They're talking about why they absolutely must Photoshop and edit those photos. So it leaves a timestamp. So there's metadata left as an imprint in every artifact. If it's a photo, you can timestamp it.
But also, apparently they took iPhones, right? Now,
this flight took iPhones, yeah.
Okay, so this would be a big deal for Apple. They would be putting out announcements and videos and things about how their phone was taken to space. I don't think they've done anything like that.
No, they know it's a fraud. That's why. So the basic thing, if you work in IT or technology, and this is something that annoys me about IT people, engineers. So if you're in IT, you should have half a brain to know that it's a fraud just based on the technology. So iPhone. So again, you're dealing with a AA battery. As a comparison, running a truck, you're not going to waste your energy and draw down for your iPhone charge, are you? You're not going to risk your life.
They would
with
have
the
taken
iPhone
power
selfie.
banks. Well, what about power banks?
The same thing. You're still drawing the same power source. So iPhone said they used Outlook. So Outlook's a TCP/IP connection. That protocol does not allow latency, so you have to be connected. So they have what's called a deep space, a deep network layer that they've added. But still, you don't have the real-time networking there from 200,000 miles away to take the selfie and have it transferred. You also don't have the transmission power, so they have to transmit it somehow. They have a transmitter that's about maybe 10% of the size you'd actually need to transmit rich data through a plenum like space, in which you're going to have what's called bit flips. You're going to have radiation interference. You're going to have scintillation. You're going to have drops. You're going to have problems. They have nothing. And these photos, these supposed selfies, a lot of them are fraudulent. They've been analyzed. Some people maintain a few of them are AI generated, so they ran through AI filters. But I think probably more likely because NASA would understand that people use AI filters to look at the pixelation. They're probably They're probably manually done and very cleverly done. They're still composites, and you can see that in some of the photos. So on my Substack, I have a photo of a selfie of the woman looking out the porthole with her braided hair. It's obviously a fake, but the real time distribution over a network wouldn't exist in space back to Earth, and they're almost immediately put onto a portal somewhere. or social media, which is impossible. So the entire rich data transport architecture doesn't make any sense, and you would not be taking selfies there. The radiation, the protons, would go through the very thin hull, and it must affect hardware, including iPhones. So it's similar to the Jeeps and the golf clubs from the Apollo missions. It's a prop. It's a kind of a distracting prop. So you look at that and focus on that, and so looking at um, issues with battery or fuel or radiation protection, you get distracted by the iPhone. And so it's obviously a fraud. The protocols don't even allow that from where they were. So, but the IT engineers, mostly quiet, and they must know damn well it's impossible, but very few say anything, sadly.
What would be the point of staging the whole thing?
Well, I think, it's as you know, it's the American empire. So at the core, the heart of the American empire are two things: war and money. So the Apollo 11 has to be followed up, and the critics are getting noisier and noisier and noisier and louder and more of them. So outside the excited states, where everyone in America watches TV and believes what's on their TV, outside in the real world, people outside the excited states, about half the population does not believe that the Americans landed on the moon in '69. Roughly half. Depends on the country, of course, but about half. It's at least a third, anyways. In America, there's maybe 10% of the population might have some doubts about Apollo 11, for example. Now, after Apollo 11 supposedly landed, it was obviously a film, a fake. That number stood at about one third. So in America, you have from 1969 to now a reduction from a third being skeptics down to about 10%. The rest of the world, it's gone the other way. It's gone from 20, 25% quite skeptical to 30, 35, 40%, maybe 50% in some countries. So the critics are getting noisy, and they have to keep the money flowing. So you have to do something. They're forced into doing something to keep the money. NASA chews through minimum 25 billion US dollars a year. If you add in all the other agencies around the world that NASA seeds, funds, and guides, probably doubling that number. Anyways, you're adding billions to that number. So per annum, it's roughly a 40 or $50 billion industry. It's a massive industry space. It's huge. And you have all the contractors and companies, enterprises that are connected with it, as well as all the people bought off. All the politicians, the senators, the media, the journals, the science rags, the university, all these research laboratories are all tied in. Got to keep the money flowing. So they have to do something. And for a long time, they did very little. They had the ISS, which a couple of tubes up 250 miles from the surface, perhaps. That's their claim. All sorts of fraudulent videos, imagery, and all sorts of other problems with that claim. Even the construction itself is problematic. That's it. That happened in 1998. So that's being demised, being replaced by another project. So they've been promising a moon bus since the 1980s. They've been promising moon holidays since the 1990s. Musk in 2017 said he'd have a moon bus for tourism ready by 2018. I looked at my calendar this morning and said 2026. We're still waiting on that. Musk has said many times in the past 5 years that by 2050, Mars will be colonized. The entire system of Mars, its biosphere will be changed to make it human habitable. He plans on sending people there. He said in 2030 in a Starship. The Starship has never got off the ground. There have been nothing but problems with that. He wants to send 1,000 people per Starship or something to Mars to start colonizing it. So these are the fantasies that they're promoting. So they have to do something. It's a big industry. It's tied to the U.S. military. What they're really after is what Eisenhower's administration said back in the 1950s. They would like to nuclearize the moon. They would like to do something on the moon, create a U.S. military base there, or do something in the upper atmosphere anyways, to control what goes on this planet. I think that's what they're really after. So they have to keep the money flowing for these projects. And then NASA gets involved with nonsense like climate baloney and global warming and all that stuff, which is connected to managing the weather. So the governments now happily admit that they geoengineer. So, another conspiracy theory has always been the chemtrails. So only an idiot like me would look up at the sky and see nucleated material and say, well, it's a chemtrail full of probably substances that could be declared nuclear in some ways, or they're chemicals that are unhealthy, include strontium and barium and other chemicals. But they admit it now. And they've been doing it since the 1950s. They're trying to control the weather. The Iranians just recently said that when they shut down the U.S. bases in the Gulf, that suddenly rain returned. So they maintain that the Americans were changing weather patterns over Iran, making Iran drier, getting rid of naturally forming rain clouds. That's entirely possible. In the UK, in the 1950s, they had a flash flood in Devon, which is a county in the west, and it killed about 35 people. The UK government admitted later that they had geoengineered the weather to cause that flood. They've been doing it since the 1950s. So this is all part of the same game. That's why NASA is part of the CIA Pentagon complex. So why do it? Keep that money flowing. And the sheep will love it. I mean, everyone. If you're a really clever sheeple, you swear your bona fides to Star Trek and Star Wars, and you watch all the sci-fi and you read all the sci-fi, and you're really clever because you say magic words like teleporting, space-time, and other magic words. So you're a really clever guy, and you follow the science. So of course you can do it because Captain Jerk, Mr. Kirk, was he and Spock and the boys are flying around all over the place, teleporting and doing this and doing that. And eventually it's going to be a reality. And you just have to be smart and clever and be part of that NASA cult. So it's a cult following is what it is. But sadly, most people don't have the critical thinking skills. You can just take a part of the program. Just take part of what you saw. You mentioned the launch. You can start with the launch. Start with the fuel. Did they have enough fuel to launch this? A 10-ton minivan out of the atmosphere. How much fuel would you need? So in Apollo 11, von Braun, the Nazis said they need a rocket the size of the Empire State Building. Well, the Saturn V rocket was nowhere near that. It was about 3% of that volume. So they're missing quite a bit of volume there to get out of the atmosphere. Go ahead.
Unless I've got this wrong, NASA have now said that Artemis 3 is no longer going to send anybody to the moon.
Well, yeah, that's the thing too. So that's Apollo 11. So Artemis, the minivan for Orion is 10 tons. So I compared to my Substack, it's not that dissimilar to what the Apollo 11 had as a command module. Then you add in the space project, the Grade 8 Science Fair project, which they call the lunar module. That was more weight, 15 tons. So now I've multiplied my problems by 2. This is what von Braun was saying. You can't launch 25 tons. This is simply not. This is why the aft coat doesn't work. It has a magic reentry, ablative material, because you can't put enough of it on because it weighs a ton, literally a ton. And you still can't cover the craft. So weight is an issue. If they try to put a lander with the Orion minivan, you've doubled your problems. You got double the power. You got double the fuel. You got double the battery. The AA battery is not going to work anymore. They're back to where they were with Apollo 11. Apollo 11 and the batteries are a significant issue. The fanboys cannot answer any of the criticisms on the battery. And if the battery dies, you're dark and you're dead. You're finished. You're finished in hours. Not Apollo 13 nonsense where you're floating around and you're doing the Tom Hanks dramatics. That is BS. You are dead in no time. You have no heat. There's no air circulation. How can you breathe without air circulation, and how can you survive without heat? Now you have to heat the landing module as well. So if they put the landing module for Orion Artemis 3 in the dark, it freezes. You can't use it when you get there. It's a dead rock. You have to heat it. Now what do I have to do? Well, if the heat builds up, I need to get the heat out of there. I have to transfer the heat. So now I have another problem. How do I do that? I need a battery. So you're back to all these issues, Jerm. They're all connected. It's not simple. They make it appear to be simple. It is so complicated. When you look at things like managing heat and air and even water, fuel. This is why they cannot land on the moon. They don't have the fuel or the battery. They haven't figured it out how to do it. And the Orion minivan slingshotted around the moon. So that's also a problem to talk about, but without getting into it detail, so it's impossible to do what they said they did. They didn't have enough fuel or speed, and they're too close to the surface. They're only 4,000 miles above the surface, based on their own calculations. But Apollo 11 was supposedly, the command module was supposedly 30 miles above the surface of the moon doing the orbit. Well, the astronauts were down supposedly on the lunar surface with their science fair project. How then did they do the slingshot back? Didn't have enough fuel, didn't have enough rocket thrust. They couldn't do the slingshot back. So you know it's a fraud just from that. And it can go on and on and on. Every single step of the way, there are problems and issues. And if you start looking at probability theory, you start looking at the phases, every single phase has to be 99.7, 8, 9, 10 nines perfect. Even then, you still only get 80% chance of success. Now, if you look at the components, everything has to work beautifully in synchronicity for those 10 days. What's the chance of that happening? Again, you do probability theory. You find out, I did a probability theory, I think I came out to 3%. 3% chance that Artemis 2, the minivan, Orion would be able to do this. And that was optimistic because it's obviously a fraud. It didn't do anything. But NASA's own documentation, they did a study in 24, 25 looking at things like the AV code, this magic wizard-approved coding, and looked at other factors. And they said the risk of death is quite high. In NASA talk, they're putting it at 10% or more. Okay, that's using simulation. They're simulating that. So you can change the parameters and get whatever number you want, but they're admitting that there's a high degree. You never go into prod if there's a 10% chance of death. I'm not getting into capsule. I'm not getting in my car in the morning if there's a 10% chance of death. I'll take my bike or I'll walk. So that's what a normal person does. So they've even admitted that they can't do it. And the probability is quite low. So this is what people have to analyze. You don't have to have a degree or be an ologist or anything. Just take something that you're interested in. Take batteries. If you understand energy, electricity, and batteries, just take that and start analyzing and say, what's the probability of all that working over 10 days and surviving a re-entry, Mach 32, 5,000 Fahrenheit heat, hydrostatic pressure pushing in and around the minivan. It would crush it. The batteries would die anyways, but you can do any analysis like that. You never hear any of it, Jerm. Never hear it in the fake news, the fake science journals, nothing from IT guys, nothing from guys with PhDs. In fact, you hear nothing. It's so disappointing. They just buy the narrative or they support it for whatever reason, because it's part of their cult, maybe it's part of their religious doctrines that they believe in. But there's no analysis of reality. And you just use basic math theory that we all learned back in grade 9, probability theory, and start doing some calculations. And that's all I'm asking people to do. And once you start doing it yourself, you find out there's just no chance that whatever they're showing us cannot happen in real life. It doesn't happen physically.
Why do people believe it?
I think it's part of the culture, the zeitgeist. I think it's the cultural milieu where people believe that it comes from the 60s where we had the supposed Cold War and we had this space race where both sides were saying that we had to win. We had to win the space race to control space, or the other side, if they control space, would control the world. And so whatever system was best would win. That's how it was portrayed. So the Western system, state capitalism, I guess you can call it, won that particular encounter with the Soviets, a totalitarian state-based, communist-based system, and proved that it had more value, could produce technology, had more scientific advancements, et cetera, et cetera. So it became part of the system, became part of the education system. You're taught this starting in kindergarten, that because of our great system and our great technology, we were able to defeat the Soviets. And so it becomes part of you. And this is so people outside of America don't have that same emotional attachment. They could care less. People like me don't care about it. I could care less to go to the moon. I think it's a complete waste of time and money. There's nothing there, except unless you want to die. But for the Americans, because they control the media and the publications, and they're the gatekeepers of almost everything that's disseminated around space, the American, it's very emotional for them. It's part of how they won the Cold War. And so they propagate that through films and through books and through universities. And it's very difficult to ignore because it's so prevalent. So I think it's just an emotional attachment without any real critical thinking or logic. And the other thing is that people always say is that the moon landings or Artemis 2 must be true because X number of people worked on the programs, whatever the numbers are. Well, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, this is a fiction. So you could actually simulate Apollo 11 with fewer than 50 people actually knowing what's going on. You could have someone building in Huntsville, Alabama, aluminum strut for the capsule, another guy making the seatbelt, another guy making the glass. They don't have a clue what's going on. Okay. But the 50 people who understand the architecture end to end, who are responsible for NASA's own communications network. NASA has its own communications network called NASCOM. And they built this during the Apollo 11 program. They have their own orbiting satellites. They have 4,000 of them. It's called a mesh, satellite mesh, and they control the transponder signals going back to the Earth receivers. So in Apollo 11, they had one. It's called the TETR. Now they have 4,000. That's what people, you pick up a signal and you're saying, well, that's from Artemis 2, 200,000 miles away. No, it's from a low Earth orbit satellite, one of 4,000. 4,000, it's a mesh because of high availability and it covers the entire planet. So Apollo 11 was a little different. It was centralized. It was just a single large satellite. So they decentralized that architecture, but they control the signal. So if someone says that, well, the Soviets picked up the Apollo 11 signal in '69, that's simply false. The Soviets picked up was a low Earth orbit satellite sending a S-band transponder signal to a receiver on the Earth. Doesn't mean it came from outer space. Doesn't mean it came from anywhere. It means it came from another terrestrial location up to the low Earth and back down. That's the networking architecture that they have. Did the same thing with Artemis 2. It's not difficult to do, and they were testing this in 1968. The TETR, and they rolled it out in '69. So nobody knows this. No one even talks about it. Why are you rolling out an S-band transponder low Earth orbit satellite if it's really coming from the moon? Why do you need it? You don't need it. The fact is that the homeless shelter, the lunar module transferring rich data from the lunar surface is a joke. They had a little satellite slapped on the back of it, hardwired to a transponder sitting in the hall. That S-band transponder for Apollo 11 ran on the equivalent of a refrigerator light bulb. The VHF headsets they have, they're talking, has to have to transmit over that frequency, VHF, to the transponder through the hull, which then takes it, gives it to the satellite. The satellite has to be locked into a receiver station on Earth and send the signal. Now, there's just not enough power. The source and the plenum of space, the radiated plenum of space would take that signal and turn it into noise. You wouldn't even be able to, it would be nothing by the time it hit the planet. So, that's a fraud. So the communications are all terrestrial. All the comms, Nixon's green phone, the astronauts supposedly talking, it's all terrestrial because there's no drops, there's no flips, there's no what's called scintillation, there's no loss. And the communications network, even today, is not strong enough to send signals like that in real time, where the round trip is taking less than 3 seconds. It's simply impossible. They're talking, and sometimes even below real time. It's like that sometimes. It's immediate, and it's simply impossible. That technology, it's impossible today. So that's a fraud. But there's so many other issues with the architecture, networking, and again, if you're interested in IT or you're interested in software, comms, that's what you should look at. Study it, analyze it, convince yourself that it's possible. There's absolutely no testing proof of what they showed during Apollo 11. None. There's no testing of that anywhere like that. And there's no testing proof of what they showed with Artemis 2 and Orion. They cannot show you any reality-based production testing of that. So the comms are an easy area to look at and reveal the fraud if people are interested.
Okay, so how can I follow all your Substack work?
So I have a Substack called Unstabinated, UNSTABBINATED, Unstabinated. So that means I wasn't stabbed during the Rona pandemic.
And it's titled Scientism, the New Religion.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I'm more interested. So the space stuff is kind of a sidelight. I'm more interested in physical sciences. So I talk about a lot of the laws, so-called laws. No laws in physics and reality. So my background is physics and IT. I talk about a lot of the theories that were told are true or not true. Einstein is thoroughly destroyed. Newton, for the most part, as well. And it gets to the heart of our philosophy. So if these theories like relativity and the Big Bang, heliocentricity are doubt or wrong, changes everything. If the speed of light is wrong, which it is, it changes everything. So if space is a plenum, it's an etheric, sponge-like, fungible material, it changes everything. And it is. So we're living in a bit of a dream world, Neo. So the Substack is just trying to get people to think out of the box. Even if you don't understand some of the stuff I talk about, I put some simple experiments on there. Say, okay, there's an either. You can do it at home. Here's how you can prove there's an either. I got a post coming up on Benjamin Franklin. People don't even know anything about even Americans know nothing about Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is a precursor to Tesla. Tesla harnessed the ether. He harnessed the energy from the ether through what's called longitudinal waves. The science has gotten rid of longitudinal waves. They don't exist. Franklin was doing this 150 years before Tesla. People don't even know that. They teach us nothing about what goes on in real life. And it would change everything. If Franklin and Tesla are right, and you can harness free energy from the ether, what the hell are we doing? Why have we given that up to the U.S. military to do weapons, direct energy weapons? People don't know that Tesla demonstrated in 1933 in New York City, he demolished a building using sound waves, which is a DO. It's a direct energy weapon using sound waves and frequency. And he said all he did was harness the frequency of the sound waves at the right level, and he destroyed the structural integrity. That's what he was doing. So that's what the U.S. military has. The U.S. military has that capability. So we've given over to the military. Now imagine if we had that for civilian use, and we could use what Tesla and Franklin were doing. Just amazing what could be done. Sure. So that's what the Substack's about, is about challenging the narrative, quack-zines as well, and all that other nonsense that people talk about. Evolution's on the one I can't stand, as if the bacteria became you. So these are things that people may not agree with it, but at least it will get people thinking and challenge the dogma.
Well, that's precisely why I have you on my show.
Thank you, Jerm. Yeah, we have to challenge the dogma because it's so much of it is wrong. Not everything is wrong, but a lot of it's wrong, and it's used for malicious purposes. That's the thing. That there's evil in the world. You can taste it and bite it and feel it, and it was quite apparent during the Rona pandemic. The bat to pangolin virus story that they had. It was quite apparent that evil existed during that period of time. So I think a lot of people woke up. I think about maybe a third of the population finally got out of their slumber and said something's not right here. There's still 2/3 to go. So we have some work to do.
All right. Dr. Ferdinand Santos, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks, Jerm. That was fun.